All right, welcome everybody. This is one talk that I'm doing in a whole series that's going to be about publishing platforms that are particularly suitable for independent intellectuals, just because I think there are so many different interesting places to publish nowadays, but it's quite hard for people to know where exactly they fit in. So that's one of the goals for these sessions I'll be doing is to help people understand what particular publications are looking for, what their style is, and whether or not they might want to submit to various publications. And hopefully also we'll be learning some lessons from the particular individuals we speak with, because often the editors or the representatives of these different upstart publications are in their own right interesting independent intellectuals with their own fascinating trajectories, and they often have learned a lot themselves as individuals. So I'm running these seminar sessions on behalf of indiethinkers.org, which is a private community with pretty much the express purpose of supporting other independent intellectuals just like myself. And it's pretty much got a few different features to help people who are trying to pursue long-term independent intellectual work, but outside of institutions. I'll just briefly say that if anyone is interested in indiethinkers.org, you're more than welcome to request an invitation at indiethinkers.org. And then I'll just invite you to jump on a call with me and we can talk more about it if you're curious. Other than that, I think we should just jump right in. We here have today Iona Italia, who is quite an accomplished independent intellectual in her own right, with some experience in institutions. She has a PhD, and some experience outside of institutions. She is active on the internet and has an interesting public profile. So she is a sub-editor at a magazine called Areo, and Areo's been on my radar for quite some time, but as I was saying before, it's just hard to know exactly what these different publications are looking for, what exactly their mission is. So I want to just jump right in and ask Iona if she could start by telling us a little bit about Areo magazine and what really is the overarching purpose or philosophy, if you will, of Areo as you understand it.
I love the way you describe them as upstart publications. I'm going to use that word. So Areo has a universal liberal humanist philosophy, I would say. And we look for writing political and social commentary from not all ends, but both sides of the political aisle. And also, we also publish pieces, book reviews, pieces on scholarship, on science, on art, on technology. Probably about 80% of our writers are academics or former academics. I would say there's about 4/5 of our writers. It's absolutely not a requirement, but there are a lot of academics who would like to publish essays either on topics that are outside their specialist field or in a style which is less obscure or even obscurantist, less kind of burdened with academies, not in any way dumbed down, but just more eloquent and communicative. So we provide a forum for that.
Okay. And what about the authors who are not academics? What are their profiles like generally?
It varies a lot. So we have, for example, we've had a number of professionals have written for us. We've had doctors, geneticists, lawyers. We've also had a few writers. The poet Clint Margrave has written for us, and also some artists, and a few other people who just wanted to express a specific opinion. We don't really look at the qualifications of writers unless they're making very specific claims that rely upon their qualifications, but usually they aren't. So usually most of the pieces have to stand or fall on their own merits.
I see. Okay. Are there occasionally, though, do you get submissions from people who are just totally random people who are just smart and they worked hard on putting together a strong case about some sort of argument and you publish that sometimes, or how often?
How often? I don't know.
But you do occasionally.
Yes, we do. I haven't prepared stats for you, I'm afraid.
No.
We certainly do. I should clarify also that we only publish about 5% of submissions.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. So we do get a lot of submissions, which is great.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a pretty selective acceptance rate. So, what would you say when you look at incoming submissions? What are some obvious quick red flags? I think it's interesting to share with people the perspective of an editor who's inundated with all of these different submissions. As an academic and someone who's graded papers before, it's a similar thing. You learn very quickly there are certain aspects of submissions that just very clearly indicate this is not going to be a high quality submission, that allow you to pretty much put it in the garbage stack right away. Do you want to share with us, from your perspective as an editor, what are some of the most common problems you see that make you immediately throw a paper out?
The most common problem is just not being very good at writing. So nothing to do with necessarily the specific idea expressed or the point of view or the political stance or anything else. It's just when the thing is poorly written. We do at Areo quite heavily copy edit. And that's something that we make our writers aware of. If you really want your work to appear out in the world untouched by an editor, then we are probably not the best place to submit. We do allow, of course, writers to vet and veto any changes we make. But we do work with some articles which are written by non-native speakers or just expressed more poorly when the quality of the ideas is very high.
Okay.
But mostly rejections are this is just extremely poorly written. It's either obtuse and incomprehensible, or it's just endless academic peacockery. Like, I feel your reader made aware of the fact that it is necessary to draw attention to the importance of the study, which I have been. Yeah, there's a lot of this kind of long-winded saying absolutely nothing, but mostly it's just poor writing skills, or let's say inadequate writing skills for the magazine.
Okay, that's interesting. So if you encounter work that has a fundamentally good idea, but the writing is perhaps in need of work, you will put in the copy editing work potentially to fix it up for them, or to help them fix it up.
If the article is good enough, if we feel the central idea is original and good enough, then we have been known to go through several drafts with authors to send them feedback, ask them to resubmit, just like an academic journal would. And I will also almost always copy edit for readability and make it conform to house style. I don't usually change content, but I do usually trim the fat of people's articles a little bit. But in general, we try to only do that for really more outstanding ideas. Most people's essays that are rejected fall short at the stage of just not being well written. Being able to write well is a high-level skill that I think many people don't have or haven't sufficiently honed. And then it also does depend on what we have recently published or have already accepted for publication. So we might not want to accept your article because we've just published on that topic. And then we generally we have published a few kind of fiery, polemical pieces, but we've published a few of those which were particularly fun to read, particularly well written and fun. But usually we avoid really polemical pieces that are kind of just ferociously dismissive of the other side, just character attacks or something like that.
Okay.
So we have very, very strong critiques of people, but those critiques were framed in a measured, kind of calm, intellectual way, not in a sort of ranting way. We don't publish many rants. Very occasionally somebody sends in a rant which is really amusing, but most people are not good judges of whether or not their rants are amusing.
All right. Okay. Interesting. So pretty much if a submission has basically strong writing skills and is not too polemical, then what comes next in the filtering process?
The topic can be controversial. It's just the tone can't be. Can you believe what stupid morons the other
Sure.
side? And there's an awful lot of that. We also tend not to. We tend not to publish race science themed pieces about human psychological neurodiversity or whatever the term is. It is a universal liberal humanist magazine. We're interested in conservative and in left wing viewpoints. We've had some conservative, some libertarian writers, and I would say that there is a preponderance of more left leaning writers at Areo.
Okay.
We're absolutely open to thoughtful takes by people on the right and libertarians. We have had a few Marxist pieces also. But we are generally, if people want to write about IQ differences between people of different races or something like that, we send them over to Quillette to put that in there, because the universal part is important to us. We're not really interested in kind of comparing people of different races.
I mean, I think every publication has certain editorial lines, and that's very useful for you to just be upfront about that. That's useful for people to know.
That absolute proponent of free speech, so I'm happy with people publishing absolutely anything wherever else they wish. And I did defend Noah Carl when his contract was not renewed at Oxford recently because of his more controversial work on race.
Sure.
I do take a principled stance on that, but in general, we're not very interested in that topic. We wouldn't publish a piece by someone arguing that we should do or not do a thing because God wants us to do or not do that thing.
Okay.
So we don't vet authors, for example. We're not going to ask what kinds of beliefs you have in your personal life. It's only the article itself.
So, are you aware, Iona, of any interesting cases of Areo publications having particularly impactful effects on the world, or interesting stories of authors for whom publication in Areo played some sort of role in some kind of future development?
Oh gosh, no.
That's okay.
I mean, I haven't closely followed. It's quite hard to closely follow the trajectory of articles once they've left my desk, been published and appeared. I would say that we have a couple of very frequent writers to Areo who are still very young. Daniel Sharp, who we've actually employed as one of our staff writers, who's just turned 20 and is an undergraduate at Edinburgh. So he's an extremely talented young man, and hopefully this will have an impact on his career.
Did you first find him or encounter him just from him submitting cold pieces?
Yes.
Okay, right. So that's quite interesting then. So for any other 20-year-old students out there, if you're really talented, a cold submission might very well eventually turn into a staff job.
And we just published a piece by Inas. I think she is publishing pseudonymously because she comes from a extremely conservative religious background. But this is our second or third piece that we've published by her. She is an Arab feminist. And I believe she's also 20, has just turned 20. So we've had a couple of very young writers who are just extremely gifted. And I think our most read piece is also probably our longest piece. And that's a piece by Helen together with James Lindsay, and it's called A Manifesto Against the Enemies of Modernity. If
okay,
anyone
cool.
would like.
So do you have any sense of average traffic rates for different articles? Like how many eyeballs do you expect to see the average article for Areo?
Oh God, I'm sorry. I clearly have not done the right kind of research. I'm extremely bad at remembering numbers. I tend to try not to worry too much about how many eyeballs are on things.
Good attitude, probably.
I can't really control that. I can only control, choosing the publications, the pieces that I think are good.
Well,
Um,
that's a lesson
I,
in its own right. I think that's a good attitude to be honest.
yeah, I kind of take the attitude that if you build it, they will come.
Mhm.
Um, but if you are trying to second guess what people will read, I think that my experience is that it's very hard to do that.
Right. I would also like to know a little bit more about you, Iona, because you have quite an interesting history and trajectory as an intellectual in your own right. You have a PhD, but it seems you're also investing a lot of effort into developing independent creative work on the internet. Could you go back in time a little bit and paint a picture for us about when you first started really publishing on the internet and getting traction on the internet? Could you tell us how that worked out for you?
So let me see. It was, I guess, 2016, 2017. So I was an academic until from about the time when the dinosaurs went extinct up until 2006. And I left academia in 2006. And for 10 years, I was working freelance as a translator. And then I was studying and improving my dance, and I later became a dance teacher. My main activity in that decade was dancing Argentine tango, teaching tango. I also did some touring, teaching tango and teaching music appreciation.
Hmm.
And I wrote 2 books. I've published 2 books about the culture of tango. They're not technical books, and they're not aimed specifically at dancers. They are not how-to instructional books. The 2 books are under the title Our Tango World. There are 2 volumes of it. That was my main activity until about 2016. And then I decided to go to live in India for a while to reconnect with my Parsi heritage. My father was Indian Parsi from Bombay. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to teach tango in India, so I had to find another way of earning money whilst I was there. And so I started doing much more freelance editing. And then I had also published a couple of pieces in Areo magazine myself, which I had just submitted to the magazine during the gubernatorial period of Malhar Mali, who ran the magazine before Helen Puckrose, who is now the editor-in-chief. It was a few months into my arrival in Bombay that Helen took over Areo, and we had met over Twitter. So she had read some of my pieces, and then we had begun following each other, and we interacted a lot over Twitter. And she wrote to me on Twitter, actually. She sent me a DM, and she said, "Are you interested in being the sub-editor? And I can pay you X amount per piece. Would you like to do that?" So I joined.
All right. And so you got connected with people like Helen and your kind of internet intellectual social circles, mostly through submitting your own articles to Areo, and then through Twitter was the main medium.
Yes. So I submitted a few articles to Areo in 2016 and 17. And then in August, we decided to start a podcast, the 2 for D podcast. Originally together, now Helen only occasionally co-hosts, and I'm running the podcast mostly single-handedly. And then also Letter Wiki was established, and I know you're going to be talking to Clyde or Dane, one of the founders of Letter, in a future episode, so we won't talk about that too much. But also through Twitter, Dane Rathbone found me, and he asked me if I was interested in joining Letter Wiki as a writer for them. So I write a lot of letters.
Excellent. So yeah, you're a really good example then of this type of sort of new online, very networked, very independent, but also very public creative intellectual. And you've done very well for yourself in developing all of these relationships, and you're active on multiple platforms, and you have quite a following. So this is really interesting to dissect a little bit, because I know a lot of people who they don't yet know anyone. They're talented and they're capable, but they don't have these networks. They don't know where to publish. They don't know who to talk to. They don't know how to develop this type of lovely, productive network that you have. So I'm kind of curious if you could go back to the beginning of it. You've told us a little bit about the role that Twitter played, the role that your submissions to Aereo played. But is there anything else that you think you did particularly well to help you launch into this rich, productive kind of social network of independent intellectual life?
To be honest, I really didn't do anything else. I mean, I previously had quite a large following when I was mostly blogging about tango. But that audience did not transfer over at all. I mean, I think that there were maybe a dozen people who followed me when I used to write about tango who still follow my writing at Areo, etc. None of those people are totally interested in anything other than tango, actually. It's quite a niche. But I twice now I've sort of built an audience from nothing is what I would say. Neither time did I really do anything special. So with my tango audience, what I did was I began writing a blog on WordPress. At first it had 12 views. It averaged between 10 and 15 views per post. And then I took the blog over to Facebook, and I started, instead of writing on WordPress, just writing very long statuses, essay length statuses, right into the text box on Facebook and publishing them as Facebook statuses. They weren't Facebook statuses. They were essays, even short stories that I had put into the Facebook status box. And I just gradually, people started following me, and I maxed out the followers and friend numbers on 2 Facebook accounts. And then people started asking me if I would come teach tango where they were. So I started going and teaching tango. I was never very successful, but I did manage to go to the States a few times and taught in various cities and made some money and gave a few readings of my work. I went to Albuquerque, among other places.
That's very interesting that you moved away from the blog onto Facebook and you built a real following on Facebook. And then you decided to move into different topics, mostly on Twitter, and it was completely disconnected and your audience did not move from Facebook to your new work after that.
Not at all. And I think that, so the advantage of being on Facebook is that you get a larger audience. People do not like to have to click on an extra link.
Right.
Even once I had a large audience, people wouldn't read it.
Right.
Whereas if on Facebook, if I posted a video of myself dancing, there would be 10,000 views within 24 hours. So clearly people look at Facebook things. Mm-hmm. But if I posted on the blog, there would be like 200 views. Facebook has completely disintegrated. I think it's no longer a good platform for various reasons to do.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Everybody has moved away from Facebook. But at that time, Facebook was really a good platform, but it wasn't monetizable in any way. So I did publish a couple of books, and books make almost no money, as I'm sure you know. I think I made like $500 in total from both books. And I think that in retrospect, the smart thing to do would have been to have had a much smaller audience, a readership, but have had a patron-only little blog or something like that.
I feel like you might have some kind of stylistic suggestions for Twitter. You must do something, right? If you're able to build audiences from scratch, starting over multiple times. Like, are you very active about engaging people, or do you write a lot of thoughtful replies to people's tweets and that makes people appreciate you? Do you DM people a lot, or what's your Twitter style?
My Twitter style has been all over the place. When I first went onto Twitter, I couldn't understand how it worked at all. For about 6 months, nobody liked or commented on any post. And it's just like journaling. It's like a journaling app. You write your personal thoughts and there's no interaction. And then I realized that in order to get people to interact with you, you first have to go to better known accounts and reply to them.
Okay, so that's a tactic that you pursued.
Yes, you have to be a reply guy to get people's attention.
Okay, interesting.
And then people will actually click on your posts and read your posts and start following you, and that's how you build a following. And my Twitter activity has been through many and various different stages, and I think that I have posted a lot, way too much. I had to pursue therapy for my Twitter addiction. I
Really?
won't get into that, but I have actually been very good now at managing to be on Twitter no more than 1 hour a day. But at one point, it was really out of control.
Wow.
And I think that I think the main secret is that I'm not worried about how people are going to receive my posts. In fact, it came as kind of a revelation to me that some people actually sit down and think carefully about what they're going to say before they tweet. Whereas
Yeah.
I just completely direct line straight from brain to fingers, sometimes even bypassing brain. It just kind of comes out automatically here.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I've ever thought about what I was going to tweet before tweeting it. I mean, I have the thought, and if I feel like sharing that thought, I immediately just tweet it out.
But do you ever write the tweet and then right before hitting tweet, you think, maybe not right now, I'll save that to the drafts?
I never save anything to drafts, but I do delete, especially when I feel like, okay, I tweeted that out at that moment. That's fine, but I don't want that sitting on my timeline as a kind of permanent thing.
Sure.
And so I do delete some incriminating tweets, as it were. I know that everything on the internet is forever, and I'm sure they've been screenshotted somewhere. I also made, and I think that was extremely helpful, a few larger accounts decided they hated me. And by sort of quote tweeting me in a hostile way and screenshotting, they drew attention to my account and helped it grow. Isn't effect.
Okay.
But I still do have a very small Twitter account, and I feel my work doesn't get a lot of attention, but considering that I was a dance teacher until a couple of years ago, it's not too bad.
I mean, you don't have a massive Twitter following, but I think you have a sizable Twitter following. Neither of us are super famous or anything like that, but having just enough of an audience that it's highly motivating and highly rewarding to think and write and share your work in public. That's the key. So in my view, this is what I tell people. It's not about getting 1 million Twitter followers or 1 million subscribers. It's about just having enough that you feel motivated and you feel like it's rewarding to constantly be putting your work out there. And I think for a lot of people, you know, having 10,000 Twitter followers, having 15,000 Twitter followers is a lot. There's tons of really brilliant people who maybe only have 100 Twitter followers, and they just want to figure out how they can get to 10,000 followers so that it feels worthwhile to continue thinking and writing and posting. You know?
I mean, I think that I'm going to answer the technical question first, but then there's a philosophical, psychological question that you. One of the things I think that is helpful is I have, among my fairly small number of followers, I have quite a lot of influential followers. I think that is helpful. The proportion of people among my followers who have 100,000 plus followers is high. I've had access to some kind of access, as it were. I've been able to talk to some really amazing people whom I wouldn't otherwise have got to know if it had not been for Twitter. So I would probably never have talked to Jonathan Haidt. I would never have talked to Nicholas Christakis.
And you think that's from being a reply guy?
I think it's partly from the podcast and partly from Helen's influence and partly from Areo and partly from being a reply guy. This is the other side of the Stoic fork, you know, the divide in the road, not the utensil, but the two paths that branch off. You really can't control what other people think and do. You cannot make other people like your work. You cannot make other people value your work, and you can't make other people think your work is important. And that can be very heartbreaking for intellectuals and especially people in the arts like myself, because very few people think the things that I think are important. Very few people agree with me that those things are important. Whereas lots of people want to watch porn. So if I were kind of still in my young and beautiful prime and published like photos of my boobs or something, I would get much more attention and followers and people would be more interested. People value seeing boobs more than they value reading poetry, let's say. And that's fine. You have to make your peace with that. And if you're kind of chasing other people's approval all the time, then you're going to be extremely frustrated because you don't have control over other people. And you're also allowing what other people think and feel to define you. And that makes you sort of helpless. So I really think it's important to just do the best work that you can do the work that you think is important, be as eloquent and honest and open about that as you can. And then either people will like it or they won't. Unfortunately, there's no recipe for success. And people who have been successful will tell you their recipe, quote unquote. But because of survivorship bias, we have no idea we don't have a conception of the many other people who followed the same guidelines and weren't successful.
Right.
So there is an element of I think it's 90% chance.
Wise words. Very wise words indeed. Thank you for that. I think that's very sobering, and for some people that's kind of depressing, but you're absolutely right. And I think ultimately when you just accept that and embrace that you have no control over whether people are going to like your work or appreciate it or value it, then instead you focus on what is most meaningful to you. What work do you most believe in doing that gives you the most intrinsic satisfaction? And that's really, at the end of the day, the best you can do. That's what you really should be optimizing for, is your own intrinsic satisfaction with your own work.
Well, it's very difficult to feel underappreciated, of course, because appreciation is dollars and we all have to live. I'm choosing to live on a pretty low salary, and I managed to do that partly because I live with friends who are much lower than normal rent in a very, very beautiful place. I have a lovely home here, because I don't want to give up on this and get an office job, because I feel that I feel that Ledger is a beautiful project. I feel that Areo is a wonderful project. I want to be part of making those things happen. I love doing my podcast. And I feel that I have a gift for writing and editing and podcasting. And so I feel more satisfied in myself when I feel that I'm contributing using my talents. But there is a balance to be struck between that and the kind of anxiety of not having the same financial stability.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Absolutely. I think maybe I would just ask you one final question then. I'm curious to know if you think there are any particular topics or questions that you think are just criminally neglected. Like, more people should be working on this. As an editor, you would love to see more submissions on this topic that you think is really important and no one's really addressing as much as they should be.
Gosh. In general, I feel that we severely neglect. The reason why I'm not a social justice leftist, I'm an old-fashioned leftist, old-fashioned kind of gentle socialist type, because I feel that we extremely neglect attention to people's material circumstances, and we're obsessed with people's identities. That's in general, but I don't feel that that's a topic that is neglected. There are people, of course, writing about that also. I think that there are a couple of areas in which the quality of the writing seems to be in inverse proportion to the importance of the topic. And the number one area of that kind, I think, is personal happiness. So self-help is the trashiest of genres. Only diet books are trashier. Harlequin romances and Dan Brown and things like that. All those are better written and more thoughtful than self-help, most 99% of self-help books. Yet I think there is a lot of kind of knowledge out there of different past things that people could do and ways in which they could find more happiness in their own lives, and very few people are exploring that in a serious way. Two of the few people to do that recently have been Darren Brown in his book Happy, and Scott Barry Kaufman's book Transcend. I would really like to see more books like that that are taking the question of personal happiness seriously.
That's a great answer. That's fascinating. So self-help, but with real literary quality.
With literary and intellectual quality. Self-help that isn't condescending to the reader.
Mm-hmm. This has been really, really interesting. And there's a lot of wisdom packed into this talk that we had. So I'm just very grateful that you were willing to jump on this call with me and share all of your insight and wisdom. I hope it turns into at least a few quality submissions to Aereo sometime in the future that you might not have received otherwise.
Yeah, please submit to us. You have nothing to lose. And if you are rejected, please know that we reject most submissions. So don't be discouraged. But it's one email, send it in, and you may get published.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a very good point, and that holds true pretty much for everywhere. You should just generally expect to be rejected simply because there's always lots of submissions everywhere. And, if you're going to be a serious writer, rejection is just something you're going to have to deal with all of the time. So just prepare for that and even embrace it. Just expect to always be rejected. And then when you get that acceptance every now and then, it's a pleasant surprise. That's how I always think about it.
Just send it somewhere else if it's rejected. And
exactly.
At the work, your own blog on Medium, and you can share it that way too. So you can get your writing out there, and the way to become a better writer is to keep writing and getting it out there to audiences.
All right. Well, very well put. Thank you so much, Iona. I really appreciate it. And for those of you out there listening or watching, if you're interested, please do go ahead and submit your work to Areo, as you were just invited to do. And if you're interested in developing your own independent intellectual work in a longer term way, you might want to check out indiethinkers.org, which is the private membership community I've launched and under the umbrella of which I am doing these talks. So you can request an invitation if you'd like at indiethinkers.org. And if you do that, I'll jump on a video call with you to learn more about what you're up to.